And I have to move forward and invite Sophie Bartlett. Hello, Sophie. Nice to have you here.
Hello.
Sophie is a good partner of us, and she is going to present the students' attitudes towards space science, the baseline result from a project called Our Space, Our Future, which we are very lucky to be partner as well. And so Sophie is doing an amazing, outstanding job in terms of the evaluation part. Sophie, I think you're sharing the wrong screen. You're sharing the presenter's mode. So you have to stop sharing.
I always do this.
That's a common thing. Nowadays, it's our life in doing these things. You can try again.
Has that worked?
No, it's the other one. It's the other one.
Okay. Give me a second.
Put it in presentation mode. You have two screens, right?
Yes.
So put it in presentation mode first and then share the screen. I think it's easier that way. That will enable you to choose, I guess.
Oh, I've lost you now. Right.
We're here. Don't worry. You have a bar. Okay.
There?
Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Sophie, I'll let you know when you have 5 minutes if you want to have any questions. Okay,
great. I'll start on the first side. Okay. So yeah, hello everyone. I'm Sophie Bartlett. I'm a researcher at Cardiff University in the UK, and I'm the evaluation lead for a European project called Our Space, Our Future, which some of you are all too familiar with, I'm sure. So today I'm just going to talk to you about the data that we've gathered from European students about their attitudes towards space science and the space science industry. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of the Our Space, Our Future project because my colleague Rebecca Williams is giving a full talk on the programme and what exactly we're doing with students tomorrow at 4:05 UTC. So please go see her talk if you'd like to hear more about the actual engagement that we're doing. But just by way of background, the Our Space, Our Future programme is designed to enable and empower all young people regardless of their background in terms of gender, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status, to consider a career related to space science as relevant, attainable, and exciting as a future career path for them. So we're European-wide across 5 countries. We have 5 delivery partners with all very similar coloured flags. So Denmark, England, Italy, Portugal, and Wales. And each of these are intending to engage with 10 schools in their own country. So by doing these engagements, we hope to reach 5,000 children and across a variety of backgrounds. So some of the things that we've been trying to do is target these underserved groups and those that wouldn't typically engage with big outreach programs. And we're also, as well as providing teaching to students, we're also providing continued professional development workshops to teachers and other educational professionals. So by doing this, we're kind of cascading our impact and reaching further students through that indirectly. And we're also hosting a variety of community events. We're not entirely sure how these are going to look at the moment, as they had planned to be pre-pandemic kind of festival themed with lots of people attending. So how these are going to look at the moment are still kind of trying to be decided. So in terms of the evaluation, which is what I'm doing, we've developed a very robust framework to measure the audience experience. So we can essentially measure what impact our engagement has had. And particularly in terms of students, we're looking to measure their attitudes both before and after they've engaged with the Our Space project. So we're measuring their attitudes across 5 key areas. So in terms of their general interest, so whether they find space science interesting, whether they perceive it to be relevant in terms of its importance to themselves and to society in general. The accessibility of space science. So this is looking at who they perceive to work in the industry. Is it one particular gender? Is it one particular country? Is it people from various different cultures, or is it kind of a widely accessible field? Their possible selves. So this is looking at, regardless of whether they'd like to, do they feel capable and feel like they have the skills and knowledge to pursue a career in space science. And then the career aspirations side looks at actually whether they want to, regardless of whether they're capable of, do they want to, and are they interested in pursuing a career. So we're looking at these multiple dimensions, which is quite challenging. And so far, we've just collected our baseline data. So this is all the data that we've collected before they've done any of the fun, engaging activities with our space, to just see where we're at this point, and then we'll measure them again in the exact same way after we've done all the fantastic interventions. So we gathered most of our baseline data by the end of March, and we collected 1,365 student surveys, which was really promising. And I take my hat off to all the delivery partners, because it was just absolute chaos with the complications of the pandemic. And because of the pandemic, this is why we see some of the smaller numbers for some countries, because it was just, we designed these really fun questionnaires that were designed as postcards that they fill out and then post back to us whilst they're in their classrooms. And obviously they weren't in their classrooms, so we had to kind of shift things online, and it just created a lot of complications. So I think we did really well to get this many data points. And I will say that we've also had more since then. So this number has since changed, but we've not had a chance to do any of the analysis yet. So I'm just focusing on this data for this presentation. And in terms of the demographics, we had a very equal distribution across gender. So most of our participants self-identified as male or female. And as you can see, there's generally a 50-50 split here. In terms of age, we actually had students ranging from age 9 to 18 years old. But as can be seen in this graph, the majority were 12 years old, so at the beginning of their secondary education. And this was generally what we expected, and these were the target groups that we'll be working with. So to measure the 5 key attitudinal constructs, we used these 16 statements. So students were given a list of these statements, and they were asked to respond in terms of whether they agree or disagree with them. So I've listed them here according to kind of most positively responded to and most negative. So the ones at the top are ones that people generally agreed with. So these are relating to interest, but also relevance and accessibility in terms of the different countries that work in the space science industry. Perhaps no surprise that the most negative statements were those relating to future careers. And so it's again emphasizing this familiar point that interest doesn't appear to be enough, and even where those are positive, they still really aren't interested in pursuing a career in this industry. One thing that was of interest was that we also excuse me, compared some of our findings to that of the Space Awareness Programme, which was a program with similar objectives that took place 4 or 5 years ago. And some of the questions that we asked our students were the same as what they asked their students. So although they were different cohorts and they had a much bigger cohort and audience, it was interesting to see that actually we got very similar results. So the attitudes among European students within this age group are largely unchanged in the past 4 years. So we were unable to do statistical analysis according to country, just because of some of the smaller numbers for some of the countries. But taking the results at face value, we did see some trends in the data. So I've listed here what the kind of key positives and negatives were for the different countries. So Denmark were most positive about the accessibility of space science, and students really wanted to learn more about it, but were not interested in pursuing a career in space science. So it was interesting to see that they find it interesting and they do want to learn more, but there is kind of a finite point to that. They want to learn while they're in education, but beyond that, they don't want to pursue it as a career. So there are some similarities and differences by country. Typically, that lack of wanting to pursue a career was shown in all the countries as kind of the most negative aspect. The key thing we also looked at was results by gender, and we were able to compute a lot of more powerful statistics on this. And And we did see significant differences for 10 out of the 16 statements. And at least one applied to each of those 5 different areas that we were looking at. Perhaps not surprising that for all but one of these 10 statements where there were differences, it was the male students that indicated the more favourable response when compared to the females. The only exception was the statement that all kinds of different people work in the space science industry, where females were actually more likely to agree with this. So we're doing a lot more tests, but at the moment it's looking like some of the stuff that's coming out of this is that males perhaps perceive there to be less diversity in the space science industry, which is good for themselves because they see it as to be quite male dominated. And they also were more likely to desire a career in the space science field, and were also more likely to feel that they had the potential to pursue that. So it could be that since they perceive that the field's male dominated, they're subsequently more likely to envisage themselves pursuing that field, which is great for them, but obviously still a problem for the female students. We also tried to look at any differences by age. So as I showed on the previous slide, we had quite a wide demographic in terms of age groups. So we condensed the pupils into primary and secondary school age. But as you can see from the numbers, these were by no means evenly distributed. So these results should be taken kind of with a pinch of salt. This is largely because whichever group you put the 12-year-olds in, they were just going to be the heavier group because there were just so many of them. But again, we did see some significant differences, though not for as many. This time it was the secondary school students that held more favourable attitudes for 6 out of the 7 of these that we saw differences for. This was perhaps surprising. Personally, I thought we were going to see more positive attitudes among the primary school kids, as typically what the literature says is by the time they get to secondary school and they're in exam mode and it's more didactic teaching, that's when everything goes wrong and their interest and attitude really declines. So it was quite promising to see that all was not quite lost at the secondary school stage. But given that most of them were 12-year-olds and only just starting secondary school, it's kind of a bit of a vague conclusion. So it was these statements listed here where the older students felt more positive, apart from this one shown in green, which were the primary school students were more positive. So we thought that might be because kind of when you're young and in primary school, you kind of think you can do anything. So you kind of have more self-esteem in that sense and more confidence. And it seems to be in secondary school where there's more competition, there's more subjects, there's more testing, that kind of sense of ability seems to decrease. But interestingly, there were no differences in terms of their future aspirations. So it will be interesting to see whether that holds by the end when we collect our final follow-up data. So just to summarize some of the key things that we found is that really students do appear to hold generally positive attitudes towards space science, and they recognize it as a global industry with multiple countries contributing to, and also one that provides data and findings and discoveries that are important to society. The less positive areas were in terms of relating to a career. So again, emphasizing that interest is not enough. You can't just make a subject interesting if you want to encourage people to pursue careers in it. The key things that really need to be addressed and where the problems are in terms of their possible selves. So whether they feel like they're capable of pursuing a career and whether they feel like it is a career that's interesting and suited to them. As usual, the male students generally held more positive attitudes than the female. So what we're hoping is by the time we collect our follow-up data, because we're really trying to introduce this, get rid of this unconscious bias and provide engagement activities that are suitable to all students and targeted directly at them and what suits them, that hopefully these differences will dissipate and we won't see them. And not that males will suddenly hate space science, but actually the females will come up and join them, and everybody will be more inclined to these positive attitudes. And it's interesting to see that these results were not dissimilar to those previously reported in other space awareness programs. So it's kind of just indicative that there's still more that needs to be done. And despite our best efforts, we really need to kind of figure out where things are going wrong and what is working and what isn't working, which hopefully we'll be able to get out of this evaluation. So in terms of our next steps, these results will eventually be published, hopefully in a peer-reviewed journal. And then we will be collecting the post-intervention data, which will be happening through this next academic year. And that's when we'll be looking at whether the Our Space, Our Future programme has actually had any impact, and learning about kind of good practice and what it is, not just whether Our Space worked, but specifically what engagements were taking place to promote positive attitudes and what should then be reinforced in any future initiatives. So I'm going to stop it there. Thank you for listening. Those are all our partners listed there, and our website, and also my email if you want any other information about the project.
Thank you very, very much, Sophie. That was a complete, nice presentation. And I think you shared with the audience how you didn't share all the secrets, the secret tools and methods that you use to collect all this data, but I can assure you it was unique. I've never seen anything so user-friendly, and the impact on the students also showed how well this was done and appropriated to their age. We have a question here from Richard Piccioni, asking what journals are you considering? I ask you guys, I just remind you, please put your questions in the Q&A, otherwise it's very easy to lose your questions in the trend of comments. So Richard is asking, what journals are you considering?
We have to do open access journals just because of we're funded by the European Union. We are tempted to follow the same route that Space Awareness did, so publishing in the journals that they published in, which was research in science education. But it will really kind of depend on, I guess, what our key findings are and what direction we want to take. I'm thinking at the moment it's going to be sort of looking at gender and these differences between the male and female students and why this might be. In which case a gender-focused journal might be more appropriate. But either way, it will be published in an open access journal that's available to everybody, and also our just internal deliverables within the Our Space, Our Future project will be made public in the near future as well. So there'll be 2 versions available.
There's also a comment from Sugumar saying, can the 12-year-olds decide their future? They may not be relating to space industries because their parents or the relatives or neighbor may not be in space industries. One question should have been to know how many of them knew who works in space industry.
So I'm glad you asked that. We are also doing some data collection with students' parents. So I was just focusing on the students that we're engaging with here, but we are also sending out a survey to get a sense of the science capital that the Aspires programme has done a lot on. So we are engaging with all the students' parents as well and asking them specific questions about kind of whether they're in jobs relating to space science or science more generally, how qualified or how many qualifications they have in a relevant field, how often they kind of watch scientific programs or take them to scientific events or museums and stuff like that. So we are aware that because of the young age of the students, some of them might not have an awareness of what science is, and other than your typical very clear science activities, they might not necessarily make those connections. So we made the choice to actually get that information from the parents rather than the students, to make sure that we could capture that more accurately. So that will be included in future reports.
Sophie, thank you very much. If you have any other... Yes, Sophie?
No, no problem. Thanks for having me.
It was a pleasure to have you here. And if you have any other comment or question for Sophie, you can drop it in the Q&A or on the chat if it's just a comment.